Okay.
Okay, well, hi everyone. It's great to see so many people here today, and thank you, Mark, for inviting me along. I have to say I am in some very good teaching company on the list of speakers today, so the imposter syndrome is real, but I'm really pleased to be able to share this work with you. I never thought it'd see the light of day, to be honest. Okay, so I'm Jenny Terry. I am part lecturer, part doctoral researcher in the School of Psychology at the University of Sussex. So I've been a lecturer, methods teaching focused since January, but I've been a doctoral researcher in the school since 2019, which was the year that we switched to teaching art to undergraduates. So, and I was working as a doctoral tutor. So I've sort of been there throughout the transition period. But what I want to talk to you about today is slightly different to the talks that have come before, and that I'm not really going to be talking much about what we're doing at Sussex. Rather, I'm going to be presenting some research that I did before I started my PhD. So I actually did my PG cert the year before. I was working as a researcher and doing some lecturing at another university. And I did a research project around the sort of perceived barriers to learning art. And today I'm going to particularly hone in on motivation. Okay, so I think I'm probably preaching to the choir a bit here, but I mean, certainly back in 2018, 2019, when I did this project, you know, some universities had just switched to R. It was quite a hot topic. And there was a lot of concern over the steep learning curve with R. And the concern seemed to be, you know, when you interact with R to make it do what you want to do, you've got to use the command line interface. You've got to be able to code. Whereas with SPSS or other point and click software, it's more familiar. It's Windows based. You've got drop down menus. You know, it's quite similar to other software that students are more likely to have used. But there wasn't really any research, there's still not a lot of research that really addresses the question of whether these concerns are valid. You know, are we actually doing our students a bit of a disservice by assuming that they're going to find it harder? And if they are finding it harder, you know, what is it that's helping them to overcome that barrier? I mean, I was reading sort of blog posts and things saying, oh, you know, actually our students quite like it. You know, they're quite good at it. So, you know, what is driving that? What's making that happen? So that's the sort of questions that I had in mind when I was designing this research. So it's a small study. As I said, it was part of my PG cert training, and the department in question, that, you know, they've been wondering about, you know, are they going to need to shift to R at some point? And they'd asked me to do some introductory R training with them. So I thought these were prime targets for research participants, and invited them all to do, I did some semi-structured group interviews with them, and did some qualitative questionnaires. Now, unsurprisingly, as a quant methods person, core is outside my comfort zone, but I think in this case it was not least because of the small number of people, but, you know, it was the right way to do this. And indeed, you know, what I got out of it was quite rich, deep, interesting stuff. So I sort of generally asked them to reflect on their experiences of learning R. We did get into how they think that would translate to undergrads, you know, whether they're going to have the same sort of experiences. But for the purposes of what I'm going to talk about today, I really want to talk about the first-hand experience rather than making assumptions about what students might experience. So the analysis I did, it was thematic. It was inductive, certainly in the sense that I wasn't coming to it with a theory in mind that I was trying to test. But, you know, obviously I'm aware of theories. And so, you know, being open about my potential subjectivity there, you know, I might have come to that with those things in mind, but subconsciously. And it was semantic, so I wasn't looking for hidden meaning or anything. I was sort of taking what participants at face value. So there were all sorts of themes that came out of, or rather that I identified in the data. Lots of things that we've been hearing about already today. A lot of sort of practical things. But as I said, I'm going to hone in on motivation and specifically about some of the things that might facilitate motivation to actually overcome some of the obstacles. So what do we already know about motivation in learning? Are not a lot, frankly. But we do know quite a lot about motivation in education in general. You know, it's a huge field. So, you know, it's argued to be one of the most important predictors of achievement in higher education generally. It is thought that motivation could address a lot of the key barriers to learning statistics more generally. And before, when I mentioned sort of these, you know, I was reading blogs that were saying, you know, students actually quite like this. Some of them were saying, you know, this is fine. The students will overcome the challenges as long as they are motivated. So which factors did I sort of identify that, you know, participants were saying gave them this motivation to learn and importantly to persist with art when things got difficult? So they sort of center around these three themes: accountability, value, and self-efficacy. Now I'm going to talk about each of these separately in a bit more detail, but just to point out that these actually perfectly map onto some of the things that Russell identified at the beginning when he was talking about you know, getting students engaged and getting their buy-in. He mentioned, you know, value in the sense of, you know, they need to know why they're learning this, why is it important, engagement, so that sort of ties in with what I'm going to say about accountability, and also mention self-efficacy. So hopefully that sort of adds to the evidence that I'm not talking complete rubbish here. Okay, so accountability then. So what I mean by this is giving students a reason to engage consistently and regularly with art. Now, for my participants, just having those scheduled classroom sessions and, you know, some tasks that they were meant to be doing in between gave them the sense of accountability. And they said that without that, you know, that they wouldn't have done anything. They hadn't done it before and they hadn't done it since. But importantly, that accountability was required for them, even though they were otherwise motivated. So even though they could identify value or had efficacy, they had so many other competing priorities that it just kept falling down to the bottom of the list, and they needed something that was going to push it back up the list. So when we think about our undergraduates, you know, a lot of these are going to be experiencing, or there's a greater chance that they're going to be experiencing anxiety around art and statistics generally. They may have low efficacy, so they're again going to be more likely to deprioritize this. Now, our research does suggest that students will understandably prioritize assessed work. Now, this makes sense. It's the system that we're in. But those end of module assessments, you know, those end of module exams or reports, certainly dissertations when they're in first year, you know, they're too far away to generate the required sense of urgency. So we need to kind of instill this sense of accountability earlier on. So I should say that the possible solutions that I'm going to offer throughout the rest of my talk, you know, these are not necessarily things that have come out of the research, out of the interviews and questionnaires. These are things that I've either seen myself in practice or have come from other research. And they're certainly not meant to be the answer. They're possible solutions. There's something on here even that really should just be taken as a jumping off point for better ideas. But these are suggestions to get us all thinking about what we can do to solve these problems. So the first on the list here is regular assessed quizzes and tasks. Now, this is what we do at Sussex. So the idea is that, you know, they have to submit something that is graded and contributes to their overall mark throughout the course, to ensure that they don't leave it all to the last minute, because unfortunately, there are no shortcuts. You can't, you know, I think with SPSS you can to an extent, and I don't really need to worry about this too much, because, you know, I'm just going to be able to look back at this worksheet and it's going to tell me what buttons to press. But with R, I mean, if you don't know how to drive the thing, then a checklist is going to get you nowhere. So those sort of regular quizzes keep them working towards that goal gradually. I have also seen people that do assessed attendance and participation. I think it's difficult to get this right, if it's worth, you know, if it's not worth enough of the mark, then it doesn't really mean anything, and students still don't come. But either one of these ideas, that hopefully, obviously, you need to make sure that there's some other way, if they're ill or have some other reason that they can't attend on a weekly basis, that they can sort of catch up some other way. And this is the thing that I said was really just a jumping off point. I was thinking about trying to instill accountability to each other, you know, having accountability buddies or something. I think it works quite well with PhD students that when they're writing and so on. But I think that this is perhaps best for the students that already have quite a high level of conscientiousness and engaged, but maybe struggling. So, you know, this is could be an optional thing. And like I say, it's a jumping off point for people to have better ideas. Okay, so another theme was value. So this is really just about getting students to understand why it's important to learn R. And this, of course, is going to mean different things to different people. So for the participants in my study, for them, it was sort of tied to needing it for research or teaching. So either they wanted to do it because, for example, you know, they wanted to do robust analysis, which at the time they couldn't do in SPSS. Or there were people that were feeling like, okay, everyone in psychology is moving to R and I'm going to get left behind if I don't do it. Our department's going to get left behind. So importantly, without this perceived value, motivation was low. There's someone there that said, you know, I can deal with this in SPSS, or I can do what I need to do for my research in SPSS. Why am I going to, you know, bend over backwards to learn something new? So that perceived value, as I say, is very, very important. And we see this sort of carried through a lot of motivation theories and achievement motivation theories. So we need to think about how we're going to instill this in our students. So as I said, for the staff I interviewed, it was they got it from research and teaching. This is not going to apply to undergraduates, or not a lot of them. And even if they do want to go on to be lecturers or researchers, they may not know that in the first semester of their first year. And something else that I think ties in with this is that so much of what we teach in R, particularly at the beginning, can be quite abstract. So not only do they not see how they're going to need it after they graduate, it's often difficult to see how it even maps onto the work that they're doing for their degrees. So, I mean, we can assume that their degrees have value to them. So if we can help them see how R is important for data analysis that they're going to be doing in psychological research, then hopefully that will help instill that value. So to that end, one of my suggestions is, you know, show students how the content maps onto learning objectives and how that maps onto assessments. Show them how they're going to be using this, how it's going to contribute towards their degree, but also, probably more importantly, try and use research-led or project-based teaching so that they can see how our skills are applied in psychological research and how this is relevant to their degree. So I think Glasgow had some really great examples of doing that earlier. At Sussex, we link in with other modules, so developmental and cognitive, and sort of tie it all in together that way. And another thing is we can demonstrate how R is used in the wild for in industry, or our employers use it for things that aren't just research specific. So there's so many occupations where being able to interpret or present or somehow manipulate data is very, very important, or being able to write a report in Markdown, that kind of thing. So these are things that might be able to help instill value that will then help motivate students to keep going. So final with the main three themes is self-efficacy. Now this slide has been heavily edited. It's a very, very big topic, certainly in statistics education, and there's loads of literature about the things that we can do that help instill self-efficacy. So I've kind of stuck with some of my favorite points, but for the participants, they were saying that they felt that having the confidence to learn was more important than having ability. They felt like having that confidence would give them motivation to keep going when they were struggling. And this seems to be particularly important with R. I think R is that it's inherently set up in a way that's just going to gradually chip away at your self-efficacy. It's constantly throwing errors and warnings at you and telling you that you're doing it wrong, and we need to counteract that. So again, self-efficacy, I think most people here are psychologists, I don't need to explain this to a lot of people, but it's quite a well-known theory. And most theories of motivation that I've looked at have some kind of element of self-efficacy in there, saying, this is an important thing for motivation, or as associated confidence or something like that. And importantly as well, these theories tend to suggest that if you have low self-efficacy, this can increase anxiety and in turn avoidance. Why are you going to persist learning with something if you don't think that you're ever going to be able to do it? So these possible solutions are things that I particularly like using myself. And I think this has come up already today. So normalizing and modeling mistakes and needing to Google stuff. So live coding is a really, really good opportunity for this. If you get an error, whether you know what it means or not, Google it, show students that it's normal not to understand these things. It's normal to get the errors, it's normal to have to Google it to work out what on earth's going on, make typos, that kind of thing. They need to see that it's not them, it's R. So another thing that I really like to do, I like to tell students about my own learning journey and how terrible I was at learning R at first. And often when I tell them this and say, it took a bit of persistence, and actually it took accountability because I had to do it for one of my master's modules, eventually it clicked and it was all lovely, and now I love it. And the sense of relief, you can feel it, but they often will say, I feel so much better now. And it's just all about understanding that they're not on their own. This thing that they're experiencing is not unique to them, and they will get there in the end. Encourage reflection on their progress and celebrate the little ones. So I think this is something that would tie in nicely with having those weekly sort of assessments or weekly tasks. They get them to sort of reflect on, what have you learned this week? Last week you couldn't use the filter function, but this week not only have you used it, but you've piped it into something else, and so on and so forth. Get them to actually celebrate what they have learned rather than focus too much on what they don't know yet. And start with the easy wins. So I think one of the things that caused my meltdown was trying to learn ggplot sort of 2 or 3 weeks into my master's degree, and I lost the plot. It was horrible. So don't start with ggplot, that's my advice there. Okay, there's how am I doing for time? I'm pretty close, so I'll try and whiz through this. So there was just some extra things that I wanted to address that weren't didn't really warrant their own theme. Time is a factor. So students may need more time to get to grips with R than with point and click software. Now, we hate it when people add stuff into our workload plans and don't take anything out of our workload plans. Please don't do this to students either. You know, I think it does take more time to learn than SPSS, and I think we need to account for that when we think about how many hours they're going to need to be spending on this, like outside of class time. They're going to need a lot of support. Again, this is something that's been discussed before, but we need to make sure that those resources are available to them, have things like interactive tutorials that they can refer back to, have help desks. Who are they going to be manned by? Something a participant actually suggested was having this sort of triage system where it was third year or master students that were not really students confident, really, sort of being the first line of support, and then the page, I should say, and then, you know, anything that they couldn't solve got escalated up to the faculty. So that kind of thing, make sure there's that support there. And anxiety, I could do, I was going to say an hour, but probably longer than that, talk about anxiety. But I think with R specifically, it could exacerbate existing statistics anxiety, or, you know, it's a separate construct, but, you know, there's going to be some kind of messy interaction going on there. And something that doesn't often get talked about with regards to anxiety, statistics anxiety, is the need to reduce uncertainty. And I think with R, sometimes students just assume that they're meant to learn all this stuff off by heart, or that the grammar that they're using to code, you know, they're going to have to learn a whole new set of grammar for every different thing that they do, and they don't realize how transferable that is. So if we can show them that up front, it takes away that uncertainty, and can reduce anxiety. Okay, so concluding thought, really, I think my final main statement is that teaching R itself has its own learning curve, steep learning curve. We need to manage those attitudes and emotions as well as the practicalities of how we're going to teach, and we can't necessarily swap everything like for like. We might need to assess differently, we might need to allow them more time, things like that. And yes, I mean, I've offered some suggestions, some possible solutions, some may be better than others, but I think really what we need to see is lots of scholarship to answer, you know, to look at whether these are actually the best solutions. So at that point, I would really like to invite collaborators to come and work with me on stuff. But as I mentioned, I'm at the end of my PhD and I have banned myself from side projects. But in future, if anybody's interested, you know, look me up. One final plug for the Rose Network. I can see there's people here that are actually already part of this. I run a group, a network, but it's a Slack channel, workspace really at the moment, called the Researchers of Statistics Education. And it's something that I'm developing at the moment, slowly, while I'm writing. And if anybody's interested in joining that, then yeah, look me up for that too. So that's me. If anybody's got any questions and there's time, then I would be very happy to answer them. If not, we'll go chatting.
Yeah, okay. That was great. Thanks very much, Jenny. So we do have a few minutes, maybe 2 minutes or so for questions for Jenny before we'll move on. But there was quite a lot of chat going on there as usual, and so and some of those I think are directed towards you, Jenny. So if they're not addressed right now, we can return to them later. But I see a question right there in the chat at the very end, I think for you, Jenny. Can you see that?
Do you have any advice for me as an undergraduate student hoping to get into R teaching? Now, could I helpfully contribute to teaching efforts now and develop my skills connections for more involvement in the future? Yeah, I think go and speak to, are they teaching R at your university? Because this matters, because if they are, then I would speak to them and just ask for, you know, opportunities to help out. If not, You're at Sussex. Oh, yeah, then come and ask us. We'll talk afterwards. We need help.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, just very briefly on that, we also invite our undergrads, if they want to be sort of like tutors or mentors to their other students, we invite them to do that. And amazingly, a number of them have volunteered to do that, and it's excellent opportunity for undergrads if they are so inclined.
I think it's great. I think it really helps model it for other students as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, we are right at the half hour, so I think we will end Jenny's talk now. So let me just stop the recording.